The fluorescent lights in Dr. Martinez's office buzzed like angry wasps, casting harsh shadows across his mahogany desk. Outside, Chicago's December wind rattled the windows of Northwestern Memorial Hospital, and I sat there in that leather chair, my hands trembling as words I never thought I'd hear echoed in my mind. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer. 6 months, maybe less. The pamphlets he slid across the desk felt like death certificates, their glossy surfaces reflecting the life I was about to lose. I'm Margaret, 62 years old, and until that moment, I thought I understood what loneliness meant. I'd been widowed for 8 years, living in the same 3-bedroom house in Lincoln Park, where Harold and I had planned to grow old together. Our children lived across the country, busy with their own lives, calling once a month out of obligation, rather than love. But sitting in that sterile office, listening to Dr. Martinez explain treatment options with the enthusiasm of someone reading a grocery list, I realized I hadn't truly known solitude until now. The drive home was a blur of holiday decorations and laughing families, their joy feeling like mockery against the death sentence folded in my purse. Christmas lights twinkled from every storefront, and children pressed their faces against toy shop windows while their parents smiled with the kind of hope I'd forgotten existed. I pulled into my driveway and sat in the car for 20 minutes, staring at the dark windows of my empty house, wondering if anyone would even notice if I just disappeared. That night, I called my daughter Sarah in Portland. The conversation lasted exactly 4 minutes. She was sorry, she said, but couldn't take time off work right now. Maybe after the holidays. My son David, in Atlanta, was more direct. Dad's life insurance had run out, he reminded me, and he had college tuition to worry about. The subtext was clear: don't expect to be anyone's burden. For 3 days, I wandered through my house like a ghost, past photographs of a life that felt like it belonged to someone else. Harold's coffee mug still sat in the kitchen sink, unwashed, for 8 years because I couldn't bear to put it away. The guest bedrooms that should have been filled with grandchildren's laughter remained untouched museums to dreams that never materialized. Each room whispered the same truth: I was utterly, completely alone. The snow started falling on December 18th, thick flakes that turned the city into a Christmas card. I watched from my living room window as families hurried past, bundled in colorful scarves, their arms full of presents and possibilities. That's when the idea first crept in, quiet and persistent like the cancer cells multiplying in my abdomen. If I was going to die anyway, why endure months of pain, nausea, and watching my body betray me, piece by piece? I spent that evening researching, reading about peaceful ways to end suffering. The internet was full of clinical descriptions and philosophical debates, but nothing prepared me for the cold reality of planning your own exit. I wrote letters I'd never send, organized documents that no one would care about, and tried to imagine a world that would continue spinning long after I was gone. By December 20th, my decision was made. The Michigan Avenue Bridge had always been beautiful, especially at night when the city lights reflected off the dark Chicago River below. It seemed fitting somehow to end where Harold and I had shared our first kiss 40 years ago, where we'd brought our children to watch 4th of July fireworks, where life had once felt infinite with possibility. I dressed carefully that evening, wearing the blue wool coat Harold had given me for our last anniversary. I left no dramatic note, just practical instructions for whoever would eventually find them. The house keys went on the kitchen counter next to a sealed envelope containing my will. I turned off all the lights except the front porch lamp, locked the door behind me, and walked into the December night carrying nothing but the weight of my decision. The streets of Chicago felt different at 10 p.m. Emptier, but somehow more honest. Store windows glowed with holiday displays, but the sidewalks belonged to different people now. Shift workers heading home, couples stumbling out of bars, and shadows moving through doorways I'd never noticed during daylight hours. The cold cut through my coat like a promise, each step toward the bridge feeling both terrifying and inevitable. Michigan Avenue stretched before me, its usual traffic reduced to occasional cars whose headlights swept across the snow-covered pavement. I walked slowly, my breath forming clouds that disappeared into the darkness, and tried to remember the last time I'd felt truly happy. It had been at Harold's bedside, actually, in those final moments when he'd squeezed my hand and whispered that he'd wait for me. I'd thought he meant in heaven, but now I wondered if he'd simply meant he'd wait for me to join him in whatever came after this lonely existence. The bridge appeared ahead, its Art Deco towers standing like sentinels against the night sky. I'd crossed it thousands of times by cart, but walking gave me time to notice details I'd missed. The intricate stonework, the way the streetlights created pools of amber warmth, the sound of the river moving far below. My footsteps echoed against the concrete, keeping time with my heartbeat, and I found myself counting each step like a countdown to freedom. At the center of the bridge, I stopped. The wind was stronger here, whipping my hair across my face and making my eyes water. Or maybe those were tears. The city sprawled in all directions, millions of lights representing millions of lives that would continue their complicated dance. Long after mine ended, I gripped the cold metal railing and looked down at the river, dark and unforgiving, 40 feet below. That's when I heard it, a small cough, followed by the rustle of cardboard. I turned and saw him huddled against one of the bridge's stone pillars, a figure so small I'd almost missed him entirely. He was wrapped in what looked like newspaper and old blankets, his dark face barely visible under a knit cap that had seen better decades. For a moment, we just stared at each other. Two lonely souls occupying the same desperate space. Take a moment to comment below with the word bridge if this story is touching your heart. Your engagement means everything to me, and don't forget to subscribe because this is just the beginning of an incredible journey. He couldn't have been more than 12 years old, but his eyes held the weight of someone much older. His clothes were layers upon layers of mismatched items, a torn winter jacket over what appeared to be several sweaters, pants that were too big, held up with a rope belt, and shoes that were more duct tape than leather. Despite the freezing temperature, he sat there like it was the most natural thing in the world, as if bridges were meant to be bedrooms and December nights were meant to be endured. "You okay, lady?" His voice was smaller than I expected, but there was something in it, a gentleness, that caught me off guard. Here was a child living in conditions I couldn't imagine, asking if I was okay. The irony wasn't lost on me. I wanted to tell him I was fine, to send him away so I could finish what I'd come here to do. Instead, I heard myself asking, "Shouldn't you be somewhere warm?" He laughed, but it wasn't bitter. It was the laugh of someone who'd learned to find humor in impossible situations. "This is warm, compared to some places. Plus, the bridge keeps the wind off." He gestured to his cardboard shelter with pride, like he was showing off a mansion. "I call it the penthouse." I found myself taking a step closer, my original purpose momentarily forgotten. "What's your name?" "Marcus," he said, pulling his blankets tighter. "What's yours, Margaret?" The word felt strange on my tongue. It had been months since anyone had asked my name, since I'd introduced myself as anything other than a patient number or a case file. "Marcus, do you have family?" His expression shifted, and for the first time, he looked like the child he actually was. "Had a mom. She's gone now. Been on my own since summer." He said it matter-of-factly like he was reporting the weather, but I caught the slight tremor in his voice. "What about social services? Foster care?" Marcus's laugh was different, this time sharper. "Lady, you ever been in the system? I'd rather freeze out here than go back to some of those places." He studied my face in the streetlight. "You look like you got your own troubles, though. You sure you're okay?" I sat down on the cold concrete beside him, my expensive coat against his cardboard palace. The action surprised us both. "No," I said quietly, "I'm not okay at all." For the next hour, we talked, not about my cancer or his homelessness, not about the bridge or what I'd planned to do there, but about ordinary things. He told me about the pigeons that woke him up every morning, how he'd named them and learned their routines. I told him about Harold, about the garden we'd planted together, and how I couldn't bear to tend it alone. He described the taste of real pizza versus the frozen kind he sometimes found in dumpsters. I remembered the chocolate chip cookies I used to bake every Sunday, how the smell would fill the whole house with warmth. Somewhere in that conversation, sitting on a bridge in the middle of a December night, something shifted. I realized I hadn't thought about dying for an entire hour. Instead, I was thinking about this boy, about how thin he looked under all those layers, about whether he'd eaten anything today, about how a child ends up alone in one of America's coldest cities. "Marcus," I said as the church bells somewhere in the distance chimed midnight, "when's the last time you had a real meal?" He shrugged. "Define real." "Hot food, at a table, with someone who cares if you eat it." The question hung in the frosty air between us. When he didn't answer, I made a decision that surprised me as much as it probably surprised him. Would you like to come home with me tonight? Just for tonight? I have a warm house, hot food, and a guest bedroom that hasn't been used in years. Marcus studied my face with those old eyes. Lady, no offense, but that sounds like something a crazy person would say. You don't know me. I could be dangerous. I looked at this small boy wrapped in newspaper, shivering despite his brave front, and I almost smiled. Marcus, I'm a 62-year-old woman sitting on a bridge at midnight in December. If anyone here is dangerous, it's probably me. Something in my tone must have convinced him, because after a long moment, he started gathering his meager possessions. Just for tonight. Just for tonight, I agreed, though somewhere deep inside, I suspected we were both lying. The walk back to my house was surreal. Marcus moved like he was used to staying invisible, keeping to the shadows, alert to every sound. I realized I was seeing my own neighborhood through different eyes, noticing things I'd never paid attention to, which doorways might offer shelter, which dumpsters might contain food, which windows had no curtains and therefore no privacy to hide behind. My house, when we reached it, looked different too. Where I'd seen emptiness, Marcus saw luxury. He stopped at the front door and whistled low. This is all yours. It was ours, I corrected, then caught myself. Why was I using past tense? It is mine. Yes. Inside, Marcus stood in my entryway like he was in a museum, afraid to touch anything. The central heating that I took for granted made him sigh with relief. The hardwood floors that creaked with loneliness suddenly felt warm under two sets of feet. I showed him to the guest bathroom, gave him towels that still smelled like the lavender detergent I'd always used, and told him to shower as long as he wanted. While water ran upstairs, I stood in my kitchen and realized I was making hot chocolate for the first time in 8 years. The routine came back like muscle memory. Milk in a saucepan, cocoa powder, a touch of vanilla, tiny marshmallows that had somehow survived in my pantry since my grandchildren's last visit. When Marcus came downstairs an hour later, clean, and wearing Harold's old robe that I'd never had the heart to donate, he looked even younger than he had on the bridge. You didn't have to do all this, he said, but his eyes were fixed on the steaming mug waiting for him. I wanted to, I replied, and realized I meant it. For the first time in years, I'd wanted to do something for someone else. We sat at my kitchen table, the same table where Harold and I had shared 20 years of morning coffee, where my children had done homework and complained about vegetables, where I'd eaten countless silent dinners alone. Now it felt alive again, filled with quiet conversation, and the gentle sound of someone enjoying simple comfort. Marcus told me more of his story that night. His mother had been a nurse, working double shifts to support them after his father disappeared when Marcus was 5. She'd gotten sick during her 3rd year of nursing school, something that started as a cough and ended with funeral bills Marcus couldn't pay. He'd stayed with neighbors for a while, then bounced between distant relatives who saw him as a burden, until finally the state stepped in. Foster care ain't all bad, he said, stirring his cocoa thoughtfully. Some folks really try, but some others ... double quotes. He trailed off, and I didn't push. The bruises had faded, but the wariness in his eyes told the story his words couldn't. How long have you been on the streets? Since August. It's not so bad in summer, but winter ... He gestured toward the window where snow was still falling. Winter's harder. I thought about my own August. How I'd spent it watering Harold's roses, and avoiding phone calls from well-meaning friends. While I'd been mourning my loneliness, this child had been learning to survive in ways no 12-year-old should have to learn. The guest room upstairs has clean sheets, I said quietly, and tomorrow's Saturday, so you can sleep as long as you want. He looked at me with something that might have been hope. You sure? I mean, I don't want to be troubled, Marcus said, reaching across the table to touch his small hand. You're not trouble. I paused, searching for the right words. You're the first person in months who's asked if I'm okay. When he smiled, really smiled, his whole face transformed. Suddenly he wasn't a street-hardened survivor. He was just a kid who'd been offered kindness by a stranger. I showed him upstairs, to the room that had been Sarah's before she left for college and never really came back. The twin bed with its faded floral comforter, the desk where she'd written essays about books I'd never read, the window that looked out over the garden Harold and I had planted with such hope. Marcus stood in the doorway like he was afraid to enter. It's beautiful, he whispered. It's yours for tonight, I said. There are extra blankets in the closet if you get cold. As I turned to leave, he called my name. Margaret, yes. Thank you, and I hope whatever's making you sad gets better. I stood in the hallway for a long time after I closed his door, my hand on the old brass handle, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of someone else moving around my house, footsteps across the floor, springs creaking as he settled into bed, the whisper of sheets being pulled up, sounds of life, of occupancy, of home, in my own bedroom. I sat on the edge of the bed I'd shared with Harold for 23 years and tried to make sense of what had happened. 12 hours ago, I'd been planning to end my life on a bridge. Now, I was worrying about whether a homeless boy had enough blankets, whether he'd eaten enough dinner, whether he felt safe in a strange house with a woman he'd just met. The pamphlets from Dr. Martinez were still in my purse, their dire predictions unchanged. The cancer was still there, still growing, still counting down the months I had left. But something else had changed, something I couldn't quite name. For the first time since Harold's death, I wasn't thinking about tomorrow as an enemy to be faced alone. I was thinking about breakfast, about what a 12-year-old boy might want to eat in the morning, about whether the pancake mix in my pantry was still good. I was thinking about Marcus's thin face, about the way he'd savored that hot chocolate like it was the finest wine, about how he'd asked if I was okay instead of walking past my crisis like everyone else in the world seemed to do. Maybe this was what Harold had meant when he said he'd wait for me. Not death, but life. Not an ending, but a beginning I couldn't have imagined. As I drifted off to sleep, I heard Marcus moving around in the room next door, and for the first time in 8 years, I didn't feel alone in my own house. I want to pause here and ask you something. Have you ever had a moment that completely changed your perspective on life? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and if you're enjoying this journey with me, please subscribe. Trust me, what's coming next will touch your heart in ways you never expected. I woke the next morning to the smell of coffee, which was impossible because I hadn't set the automatic timer in months. For a moment, I lay in bed, confused, listening. Two sounds that didn't belong: cabinet doors opening and closing, the clink of dishes, footsteps moving purposefully around my kitchen. Then memory rushed back, and I realized Marcus was awake and apparently making himself at home. I found him, standing on a chair in front of my stove, carefully tending what appeared to be scrambled eggs. He'd changed back into his street clothes, but they looked different now, cleaner somehow, and I realized he must have washed them in the sink. The coffee smelled better than anything I'd made in years. "Good morning," I said, and he jumped, nearly dropping the spatula. "Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to use your stuff without asking. I just thought, I mean, you were so nice last night, and I wanted to, He stumbled over the words, suddenly looking every bit his 12 years. "Marcus," I said gently, "it's fine. It's wonderful, actually. I can't remember the last time someone made me breakfast." His shoulders relaxed. "Mama taught me to cook. She said a man should know how to take care of himself and others." He flipped the eggs expertly, and I could see the pride in the simple skill. We ate together at the kitchen table, and I marveled at how different the room felt with someone else in it. The morning light through the windows seemed brighter, the silence less oppressive. Marcus ate with careful manners, taking small bites and chewing thoroughly, like someone who'd learned not to take food for granted. "What happens now?" he asked. Eventually, and I realized we were both thinking the same thing. I'd told him just for one night, but looking at him in the morning light, clean and fed and looking more like a child than he had on the bridge, I couldn't imagine sending him back to that cardboard shelter. "What would you like to happen?" I asked instead. He was quiet for a long moment, tracing patterns on the tablecloth with his finger. "I'd like to stay," he said finally. So quietly I almost didn't hear him. "But I know that's not how it works. Adults say things they don't mean. I understand." The resignation in his voice broke something inside me. Here was a child who'd learned not to hope, not to expect kindness to last beyond a single night. "Marcus, what if I told you I meant something different? What if just for tonight turned into just for a while?" His head snapped up, eyes wide. "You mean it?" "I mean it," I said, though I had no idea what I was promising or how I could possibly make it work. The rest of that Saturday was a revelation. I took Marcus to Target, ostensibly to buy him a few basic necessities, and ended up spending 3 hours watching him discover things I'd forgotten were wonderful. New socks that actually matched, a winter coat that fit properly, toiletries that belonged to him alone. He was careful with every choice, asking prices and suggesting cheaper alternatives, until I finally had to tell him to stop worrying about money and just pick what he needed. I've never been shopping like this, he admitted in the clothing aisle, holding up a package of underwear like it was made of gold. Mama used to take me to Goodwill, and that was fine, but this is how it should be, I said firmly. Every child deserves new clothes that fit. At the grocery store, I watched him experience things I took for granted, choosing his own cereal, picking apples that weren't bruised, standing in the frozen foods aisle just feeling the cool air on his face. When I asked what he wanted for dinner, he said spaghetti with real meat sauce, and I realized he'd probably been living on whatever scraps he could find for months. That evening, as we cooked together in my kitchen, Marcus washing vegetables, while I browned ground beef, I felt something I'd forgotten existed. Contentment, not happiness exactly, because the shadow of my diagnosis still loomed, but a quiet satisfaction in the simple act of caring for someone who needed care. Margaret, Marcus said as we sat down to eat, can I ask you something? Of course. Yesterday, on the bridge, you looked really sad, like really, really sad. Are you okay now? I set down my fork, considering how to answer. How do you explain terminal cancer to a 12-year-old who's already seen too much loss? I got some bad news from my doctor, I said carefully, about my health. And I was feeling very alone, like maybe nobody would miss me if I wasn't around anymore. Marcus nodded seriously. I felt like that too, after Mama died. Like maybe it would be easier to just stop trying. But you kept trying, yeah, because Mama always said you never know what tomorrow might bring. She said miracles happen when you're not looking for them. He twirled spaghetti around his fork thoughtfully. Maybe that's what this is. Maybe we found each other because we both needed finding. That night, after Marcus had gone to bed in what we'd started calling his room, I sat in my living room and called Dr. Martinez's office. I left a message saying I wanted to discuss treatment options after all. I wasn't ready to give up. Not when someone was counting on me to be there tomorrow and the day after that, and as many days as I could manage. The weekend passed quickly. We established routines without discussing them. Marcus would make coffee in the morning. I would cook dinner at night. We'd clean up together afterward. He showed me how to play card games his mother had taught him, and I introduced him to old movies Harold and I used to watch. We were both still testing the boundaries of this strange new arrangement, but it felt increasingly natural. Sunday evening, as we were watching The Wizard of Oz, for probably the 10th time, Marcus said, I should probably go back to the bridge tomorrow. I don't want to overstay my welcome. Marcus, I said, pausing the movie, what if your welcome here doesn't have an expiration date? He turned to look at me, hope and fear warring in his expression. What do you mean? I mean, what if this isn't just a weekend? What if you stayed, really stayed, and we figured out how to make it legal and permanent? For a moment, he didn't say anything, then tears started running down his cheeks, and he buried his face in his hands. Hey, I said softly, moving to sit beside him on the couch. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong, he said through his tears. Everything's right. That's what's scary. I understood completely. When you've learned to expect nothing, hope feels dangerous. We'll take it one day at a time, I promised, putting my arm around his small shoulders. No pressure, no promises we can't keep. Just one day at a time. He leaned against me, and I felt his body relax for the first time since I'd known him. Okay, he whispered. One day at a time. The reality of what we were attempting hit me Monday morning when I called the school district to ask about enrollment procedures. The woman on the phone was polite but clear. Without legal guardianship documents, Marcus couldn't attend classes. I'd need court approval, background checks, home studies, and a dozen other bureaucratic hurdles before I could legally claim responsibility for a child who wasn't related to me. How long does that process take? I asked. 6 months to a year, typically, assuming everything goes smoothly. I hung up feeling overwhelmed. Marcus was sitting at the kitchen table doing math problems in a workbook I'd bought him, his tongue poking out slightly as he concentrated. He looked up when he heard me end the call. Problems? Just complications, I said, trying to keep the worry out of my voice. But Marcus was perceptive. They want paperwork, don't they? Proof that you're not some crazy lady who kidnapped me. Something like that. He set down his pencil and looked at me with those two old eyes. Margaret, I know this is complicated. I know it might not work out, but even if it doesn't, even if I have to leave tomorrow, these few days have been the best I've had since Mama died. Nobody can take that away. His maturity broke my heart and inspired me at the same time. Here was a child who understood him better than most adults, who could find gratitude in uncertainty. That afternoon, I called a family lawyer, whose name I found online. Janet Morrison had good reviews and specialized in adoption and guardianship cases. Her office was in a converted Victorian house near downtown, and when I explained our situation over the phone, she agreed to see us immediately. "This is Marcus," I said, introducing him in her warmly decorated office filled with family photos and children's drawings. Ms. Morrison shook his hand seriously, treating him like an equal rather than a case file. "Marcus, I understand you've been living independently for several months. That takes a lot of courage." He straightened in his chair. "Yes, ma'am. And now you'd like to live with Margaret permanently, if she have me. And if it's legal." Miss Morrison smiled. "Let's see what we can do about making it legal." She explained the process. Emergency guardianship could be granted quickly if we could prove Marcus was in immediate danger on the streets, followed by a longer process for permanent custody. There would be interviews, background checks, and home visits, but she seemed optimistic about our case. "The courts prefer to place children with family when possible," she said, "but they also prioritize the child's best interests. Marcus, you're old enough to have a voice in this process. A judge will want to hear directly from you about what you want." "I want to stay with Margaret," he said without hesitation. "She saved my life." On the drive home, Marcus was quieter than usual. Finally, he asked, "What if they say no? What if they decide I should go back into foster care?" I pulled over and turned to face him. "Then we'll appeal. We'll fight. We'll do whatever it takes." "But what if, Marcus?" I interrupted gently. "Do you remember what you told me about miracles happening when you're not looking for them?" He nodded. "I think this is our miracle. And I don't believe miracles come with expiration dates." That night, I started treatment. Dr. Martinez had recommended an aggressive chemotherapy regimen that might buy me more time, though the side effects would be significant. I'd decided not to tell Marcus about the cancer yet, not until our legal situation was more secure. He had enough uncertainty in his life without worrying about losing another parent figure. The first chemo session was brutal. I spent the following day in bed, nauseous and exhausted, while Marcus brought me crackers and ginger ale and sat quietly in the chair beside my bed, reading aloud from a book he'd found on my shelf. "Are you really sick?" he asked eventually, setting down the book. "I'm fighting something," I said carefully, "but I'm not going anywhere." He studied my face. "Is that why you were so sad on the bridge? Because you're sick?" I nodded, not trusting my voice. "Mama was sick too, at the end. She made me promise not to be scared, because being scared doesn't help anybody get better. Your mama was a smart woman. She was the best." He was quiet for a moment. "Margaret, can I tell you a secret?" "Of course." "Sometimes I talk to her, to Mama. I know she can't hear me, but it makes me feel better. I talk to my husband sometimes too, Harold. I think they can hear us, in whatever way matters." Marcus smiled. "Maybe they're the ones who made sure we found each other." As the weeks passed, our routines solidified into something that felt increasingly like family. Marcus excelled in the homeschooling materials I'd ordered, devouring books and asking questions that challenged me to remember things I'd learned decades ago. He helped me with household chores, cooked simple meals on days when the chemo left me too weak to stand, and never complained about the uncertainty of our situation. Ms. Morrison worked tirelessly on our case. The emergency guardianship was approved within a month, giving me legal authority to make decisions about Marcus's education and health care. The permanent custody hearing was scheduled for spring. The judge assigned to our case is known for being thorough but fair, she told me during one of our regular check-ins. She wants to see evidence that this placement is in Marcus's best interest long term. "What kind of evidence?" "School performance, psychological evaluations, home stability assessments, the usual things." "But Margaret, there's something else we need to discuss." I braced myself. "Your medical records came up in the background check. The court knows about your diagnosis. They're concerned about what happens to Marcus if your condition worsens." My heart sank. "Are they going to deny the petition?" "Not necessarily, but you'll need to demonstrate that you've made provisions for Marcus's care if something happens to you. A will, designated guardians, that sort of thing." That evening, I sat Marcus down for the conversation I'd been dreading. "I need to tell you something important about my health," I began, and I saw understanding dawn in his eyes. "You're really sick," he said. Not a question. Yes, I have cancer. The doctors are treating it, and I'm fighting as hard as I can. But there are no guarantees. He was quiet for a long time, processing this information with the same careful consideration he brought to everything. How long do you have? He asked finally. I don't know. Maybe months, maybe years. That's why we need to make plans, in case you die like Mama did. The words hung in the air between us, brutal in their honesty. Marcus, I want you to know that even if something happens to me, I will make sure you're taken care of. I won't let you end up back on the streets. He nodded, but I could see the fear creeping back into his expression, the walls starting to rebuild themselves. I know you're scared, I continued. I'm scared too, but scared doesn't mean we stop trying, right? Right, he said quietly. That night, I revised my will, naming Marcus as my primary beneficiary and designating my neighbor, Mrs. Chen, as his guardian should something happen to me before the adoption was finalized. She was a retired teacher with grown children of her own, and when I approached her about the possibility, she agreed without hesitation. That boy has brought light back into your eyes, she said. Anyone can see how much you love each other. The spring hearing arrived faster than I'd expected. Marcus wore the navy blue suit we'd bought specifically for the occasion, his hair neatly combed and his shoes polished until they gleamed. He looked older than his 12 years, more serious, as if he understood the weight of this moment. Judge Patricia Williams was a small woman with gray hair and kind eyes, who had a reputation for asking tough questions. She reviewed our file thoroughly before looking up at us. Marcus, she said, I've read about your situation, and I want to hear from you directly. Why do you want Margaret to adopt you? Marcus sat up straighter. Because she saved my life, Your Honor, not just by taking me off the streets, but by making me feel like I matter, like I'm worth saving. And what do you understand about her health situation? I understand that she's sick, and that she might not live as long as we'd like. But she's teaching me that the time we have is more important than how much time we get. Judge Williams turned to me. Margaret, why do you want to adopt Marcus? Because he saved my life too, I said simply. When I met him, I had given up hope. I was planning to give up entirely. But taking care of Marcus gave me a reason to fight, to live, to believe in tomorrow again. The judge asked about our living arrangements, Marcus's education, my medical prognosis, and the provisions I'd made for his future care. She spoke with Ms. Morrison privately, reviewed character references from our neighbors and my doctors, and finally called us back into the courtroom. In my 20 years on this bench, she said, I've learned that families aren't always created by blood. Sometimes they're created by choice, by love, by the simple decision to show up for each other when it matters most. My heart pounded as she continued. I'm granting the petition for adoption. Marcus, congratulations. You now have a legal mother who loves you. Margaret, congratulations. You now have a legal son who clearly adores you. The gavel came down with a sound like thunder, and suddenly Marcus was in my arms, both of us crying too hard to speak. After months of uncertainty, we were officially family. The celebration that night was simple: pizza from Marcus's favorite restaurant and a cake Mrs. Chen had baked with "Welcome to the Family" written in blue frosting. As I watched Marcus blow out 13 candles he'd had a birthday during the legal proceedings, I realized something that took my breath away. My cancer markers had been steadily improving throughout the treatment. Dr. Martinez couldn't explain it, called it an unexpected response to therapy. But the tumors were shrinking. I wasn't cured, might never be completely cured, but I was getting better instead of worse. Make a wish, I told Marcus, as he prepared to blow out the candles. I don't need to, he said, grinning. All my wishes already came true. That night, as I tucked him into bed, a ritual we'd maintained even as he'd grown older, Marcus said something that made me understand the true nature of miracles. Margaret, do you know what I think happened that night on the bridge? What do you think happened? I think we were both looking for a way out, but we found a way in instead. Into each other's lives, into being a family, into believing that maybe the world isn't as cold as we thought it was. I sat on the edge of his bed, smoothing the comforter we'd picked out together. A deep blue with silver stars that he said reminded him of the night sky over the bridge where we'd met. You know what I think? I said. I think your mother and my Harold had something to do with it. I think they were watching over us both, making sure we found each other when we needed it most. Marcus smiled sleepily. Mama always said angels don't always have wings. Sometimes they just have kind hearts. As I turned off his bedside lamp and headed toward the door, he called my name one more time. Yeah, Sweethaby, I love you, Mom. Mom, the word hit me like a physical force, beautiful and overwhelming and absolutely right. I'd been Margaret to him for so long, even after the adoption was finalized, that I'd wondered if he'd ever feel comfortable claiming me as his real parent. I love you too, son, I whispered back. The following months brought a rhythm I'd never expected to experience again. School mornings filled with the sound of running water and clinking cereal bowls. Afternoons helping with homework at the kitchen table where I'd once eaten lonely dinners. Evenings watching movies together on the couch. Marcus's head often ending up on my shoulder as his eyes grew heavy. My health continued to improve, defying every medical prediction. Dr. Martinez ran test after test, each one showing further shrinkage of the tumors, until finally he sat me down with results that made his professional composure crack. Margaret, I've been practicing oncology for 22 years, he said, staring at the scans spread across his desk. What I'm seeing here, it's not scientifically impossible, but it's as close as medicine gets to miraculous. What are you saying? I'm saying the cancer is in complete remission, your blood work is normal, the tumors are undetectable, and your body is responding like someone who was never sick at all. I drove home in a daze, the word remission echoing in my mind like a prayer answered. When I walked into the house, Marcus was at the kitchen table working on a science project about genetics. His materials spread across the surface with the organized chaos that had become familiar. How'd the appointment go? He asked without looking up from his poster board. Marcus, I said, sitting down across from him, how do you feel about having a mom who's going to be around to embarrass you at your high school graduation? His head snapped up, eyes wide. I mean the cancer is gone, completely gone. The poster board went flying as he launched himself across the table into my arms, nearly knocking us both off the chair. We held each other and cried, tears of relief, of gratitude, of a future that had suddenly opened up before us like a door we'd thought was permanently locked. That summer, Marcus turned 14 and asked if we could visit the bridge where we'd met. It had become a tradition of sorts, a pilgrimage we made on difficult days when we needed to remember how far we'd come. We walked there on a warm July evening, the city alive around us with sounds and smells and the kind of bustling energy that made Chicago feel electric. The bridge looked different in daylight and warm weather, less forbidding, more like what it actually was, a beautiful piece of architecture, connecting two sides of a vibrant city. Marcus stood at the same spot where I'd found him huddled against the stone pillar, now taller and stronger and wearing clothes that fit properly. I stood where I'd gripped the railing and contemplated ending everything, now carrying the kind of hope I'd forgotten was possible. You know what's funny? Marcus said, looking out over the river that flowed steadily beneath us. What's funny? That night, when I saw you standing here, I thought you were going to jump. I was trying to figure out how to talk you out of it without scaring you away. I stared at him. You knew. I know what people look like when they've given up. I've felt that way myself. He turned to face me, but I also know that sometimes all it takes is one person asking if you're okay. One person showing up when you need them most. Is that why you spoke to me? To stop me? He shrugged, suddenly looking every bit the teenager he was becoming. Maybe, or maybe I was just lonely and wanted someone to talk to. Does it matter why? I thought about that as we walked home, Marcus chattering about his plans for high school and college and all the tomorrows he could now take for granted. Did it matter whether our meeting was chance or fate, desperation or divine intervention? What mattered was that two lost souls had found each other in the darkness and chosen to walk toward the light together. Now, 3 years later, as I sit in the audience watching Marcus accept his high school valedictorian award, I understand something about miracles that I never grasped before. They're not always dramatic moments of divine intervention. Sometimes they're as quiet as a homeless boy asking if you're okay. Sometimes they're as simple as deciding to make hot chocolate for someone who needs warmth. Sometimes they're as ordinary as showing up, day after day, for someone who's learned to expect nothing. Marcus's speech that night was about second chances and found families, and the courage to believe in tomorrow, even when today feels impossible. As I listened to him speak with poise and wisdom that still amazed me, I thought about the woman I'd been on that bridge 4 years ago, broken, alone, convinced that her story was ending. That woman couldn't have imagined this moment, sitting in a crowded auditorium, bursting with pride for a son she'd never given birth to but loved with a ferocity that surprised her daily. She couldn't have pictured the life we'd built together, messy and imperfect and absolutely beautiful in its ordinariness. After the ceremony, as we celebrated at Marcus's favorite restaurant, surrounded by friends who'd become our chosen extended family, he raised his glass of root beer in a toast. "To Mom," he said, his voice carrying across the table to reach everyone present, "who taught me that family isn't about where you come from. It's about who shows up when you need them most." I raised my own glass, looking around at the faces of people who'd become part of our story. Mrs. Chen, who still brought us homemade soup when either of us was sick. Ms. Morrison, who'd fought for our legal right to be family. Dr. Martinez, who'd witnessed what he still called my miraculous recovery, and a dozen other friends who'd rallied around us when we needed support. To all of us, I said, for proving that miracles aren't just things that happen to other people. Sometimes they happen to anyone brave enough to keep their hearts open, even when keeping them open feels like the scariest thing in the world. As we clinked glasses and laughed and made plans for Marcus's college years, I caught a glimpse of our reflection in the restaurant window, a middle-aged woman and a teenage boy, so clearly not related by blood, but so obviously connected by something deeper and more enduring. Love, choice, the daily decision to show up for each other, no matter what. That night, as we walked home under the same stars that had witnessed our first meeting, Marcus slipped his hand into mine the way he used to when he was smaller and the world felt uncertain. "Mom," he said quietly, "do you ever wonder what would have happened if we hadn't met that night?" I squeezed his hand, thinking of all the alternate timelines we'd avoided him freezing to death on the streets, me ending my pain in the dark waters below the bridge, two stories that would have ended in tragedy instead of transformation. "I try not to think about that," I said honestly. "I prefer to focus on what did happen, how we saved each other without even realizing that's what we were doing." "Me too," he agreed. "But sometimes I think about it just to remind myself how lucky we got." Lucky, it was a word we'd both learned to use carefully, having experienced enough hardship to know that luck wasn't something you could count on. But standing there under the streetlights of our neighborhood, our hands linked and our hearts full, it felt like the only word that fit. We'd been lucky to find each other in our darkest moments, lucky that love turned out to be stronger than fear, that hope proved more resilient than despair, that family could be created by choice rather than chance. But more than lucky, we'd been brave enough to trust a stranger, to open our hearts when they'd been broken, to believe in possibilities that seemed impossible. As we reached our front door, the same door I'd walked through alone so many times, the door that now opened to warmth and laughter and the beautiful chaos of shared life, I realized that Marcus had been right all those years ago on the bridge. Miracles do happen when you're not looking for them. They happen when you're busy being kind to someone who needs kindness, when you're focused on surviving another day, when you're simply trying to do the next right thing without any expectation of reward. Our miracle hadn't been my cancer going into remission, though that was certainly part of it. Our miracle hadn't been the successful adoption, though that had made everything legal and official. Our miracle was the moment a 12-year-old boy looked at a broken woman on a bridge and asked if she was okay. It was the moment I decided to answer honestly instead of pushing him away. It was every day afterward when we chose each other, chose family, chose love over fear. Tonight, as I write this story, Marcus is upstairs packing for his freshman year at Northwestern University. He's studying to become a social worker, specializing in helping homeless youth find stable placements. "I want to do for other kids what you did for me," he told me when he declared his major. "Both my cancer remains in remission, my health better than it's been in years. I've started volunteering at a local shelter, and next month I'm opening my guest rooms to emergency foster placements, teenagers who need a safe place to land while social services work out their permanent situations." We've learned that our story wasn't just about us. It was about the ripple effects of compassion. The way one act of kindness can spread outward in ways you never anticipate. The bridge where we met has become a place of pilgrimage for us, but also a place of service. On cold nights, Marcus and I often walked there together, carrying thermoses of hot chocolate and sandwiches for anyone who might need them. We've met dozens of people over the years, some we've been able to help in small ways, others who've moved on before we could learn their stories. Each time we go, I remember that night 4 years ago when I stood at that railing and thought my story was over. Now I understand that it was just beginning, not ending, but transforming into something I could never have imagined. If you're listening to this story tonight and feeling alone, if you're facing darkness that seems impossible to survive, I want you to know something. Your story isn't over either. The next chapter might be beginning right now, in this moment, with the simple decision to hold on for one more day. Miracles aren't always grand gestures from heaven. Sometimes they're as quiet as a stranger asking if you're okay, as simple as someone offering you a warm place to sleep, as ordinary as choosing to trust again when trust feels impossible. Sometimes miracles look like a homeless boy and a dying woman finding family in each other. Sometimes they look like whatever happens next in your own story. If you're brave enough to keep writing it. I never believed in miracles until a street boy found me and changed my life forever. Now I know they're all around us, waiting for the moment when our hearts are open enough to recognize them. What's your miracle story? I'd love to hear it. Share your thoughts in the comments below about moments that changed your perspective on life, times when hope appeared when you least expected it, or people who showed up for you when you needed them most. Your story matters, and sharing it might be exactly what someone else needs to hear tonight. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to join our community of people who believe in the power of unexpected connections and second chances. Tomorrow I'll share another story about ordinary people discovering extraordinary strength in the most unlikely places. Until then, remember, you never know what tomorrow might bring, and you never know who might need you to ask if they're okay.